Good afternoon. Today we will finally treat this subject that I've announced since 2 weeks already. Just for the sake of my French-Canadian auditoire ici, I will translate the word uncanny once, and then you will be able to understand what it's all about. It's habitually it's translated by l'inquiétante étrangeté. Like something who is strange, but also is worrying. Not okay. So we saw with the previous lecture that we could have thought that with the theme of the beautiful and the theme of the sublime, we will have covered more or less what is the domain of aesthetic as such, even including also what I did last time about human proportion and all that as a species, let's say, of the beautiful. But the personage who have, let's say, make us aware of another dimension of aesthetic feelings, if you want, is the Sigmund Freud. Freud says that there is a domain that is not covered too much by the specialists, or by the philosopher, let's say, the specialist of aesthetic, but nevertheless could be of interest, and especially for psychoanalysis. And he described it in his short essay, which in German is called Das Unheimlich. Unheimlich. In this word, you have un, which is like a negative, if you want, like uncanny, and heimlich come from the same root like heim, like in English, home. So the heimlich is something familiar, something I would say even from the house, from something who have something to do with domesticity. But on the other hand, if you put a negative in front of it, that means it's something unfamiliar. So he says this is a region in which you could have the feeling you will get. It's not a feeling of joy and enjoyment and all that. It will be rather of worriness, of even fear, anxiety, or something frightening. But it's funny because it's a mix of something familiar, but suddenly was shown under unfamiliar terms, let's say. That will be his first definition of this uncanniness. And he says, this is a region who is different from the sublime. I spoke also that in front of a spectacle of, let's say, of a high mountain or even a storm and all that, we may be afraid. But you remember always when you have this feeling of the sublime, there's always a little parenthesis in case you are yourself in security, that you are not threatened by the spectacle in front you are. Because if it threatens you, you just run. You don't give a damn of sublime and anything of aesthetic nature. So the uncanny is different because you will see it's like a certain sector, I would say, of this anxiety domain, anxious domain. And Freud quote a psychologist or psychiatrist, I think, of the time, who's called Jens, who says it is when, for instance, you are in front of something who is dead and you suspect that they may have a soul, or the opposite. You are in front of something who have a soul, but you suspect it's dead. It's kind of opposition of that kind. And right away, Freud says, well, you could have, for instance, this feeling in front of a wax figure. Say you go in a wax museum. I remember we used to have a wax museum here in Montreal, and there was always this stunt that the guide make with us, with the spectator. You come there, and there was a guardian there, but he was in wax, of course. And he always bang him on the shoulders like this, and we were scared. I said, don't do that. He's the guard here. He may get angry. But then you realize, well, it's very realistic. It's in a wax figure. So you have this feeling that, okay, this is something inanimate, but who looks like having a soul. That will correspond to this definition. Freud had to this dolls, for instance. Well, I guess he thinks of adult dolls, a little bit big, and also automats. meaning robots. Anything who is animated like this, like a machine, but will be so realistic, let's say, that you will think that it's alive. And indeed, one of the examples of these automats of the 18th century, in fact, it is these three figures that you have there, who were done by a Swiss horloge watchmaker. So that's very good for Swiss to organize little machine, let's say, that will make these three figures animated, in fact. And the one on the left is called the little drawer. You have a little piece of paper, and then suddenly when you connect it, well, there's no electricity in that. It just cranks and clogs and things like that. And when you start it, let's say, it will draw a little animal or something on his little piece of paper. Always the same, of course, but you pass there. The middle figure will play a little tunes on a harpsichord. And the third one, that's the one always quoted by André Breton and by the Surrealists, is the young writer. And according to Breton, he writes marvelous, marvelous, marvelous. In fact, he writes j'écris, which is not so wonderful. Anyway, and so the Surrealists always they give that as an example of this kind of uncanny figure, let's see, in which you have this mixture of something with material and seems to have life, seems to have a certain animation, a certain soul, if you want. Opposition between body and soul, but also opposition between life and death, and I would say even opposition between movement and image. And this is much more interesting for us in art history, this connection, because right away you will think of the example by excellence of this opposition between life, which is expressed in movement, and an image applied to photography. And it's so much like this that at the beginning of photography, it was seen as a way, almost as a means of mortification, I would say, of transforming the living person who is in front of the photographer in a dead person. Why? Because you have to be immobilized. You have to be almost frozen to be photographed. And the image that it gives of you is not you as a living being, but rather an image of you as arrested, as frozen, as dead. And always at the beginning, and when the Röntgen find the way to make even an X-ray, well, that was it. You could have not only this immobilization of the person in the photo, in the image, but you could see even its skeleton. And it's one of the first of these famous early X-rays, you see, done by Dr. Röntgen himself, and I don't know who is this von Kolliker, but it's not important. And obviously he was a married man, and he goes with his rings. And then the idea was that then the X-ray show you as you will be when you will be dead, like a skeleton. And there was even some religious people says, this is really the truth of yourself. You see, this is as God see you. I hope you see us a little bit differently, but this this was said at the beginning. And you have the opposite problem when photographers try to photograph movement. They had right away a problem, and because, say, for instance, in the very early photography of Étienne Jules Marais, for instance, who was one of the first photographers who was really interested with Muybridge, let's say, to photograph movement. Then what you get, if you have, of course, slow type of objective that they have at the time, if you have a horse, for instance, walking in front of you, you get this kind of blurred image. And it confirms, in a way, this association with image and fixity. If you try to photograph movement, you reduce the visibility of what you are looking at. It's become blurred. It's become more difficult to understand. If I didn't know that it was a horse, maybe because we see the hoof and hooves on the ground there, but otherwise it could be whatever. It could be a zebra for all I know. Say the image become blurred because it's in movement. So you see always this association with image and fixity and depth, if you want, on one hand, and on the other hand, the difficulty that to see and to really to see, you have to stop the movement. And it's true, in the beginning of photography, the time of exposure was so long that in order not to have this type of blurred image, they had a device like Daumier did here, and that hold the head of the sitter in order that he will not move. And here, obviously, the man make a stupid move. He will be blurred on the image. He look at his girlfriend who is perfect. It was there for her. And, okay, Daumier called this one Photographie Nouveau Procédé. But there's another caricature. I don't have it, but I have the caption, and it will go very well here. It says, patience is the virtue of asses. La patience, c'est la vertu des ânes. That's one of his captions. Because really, they took a lot of time to make this photography. When later on, they had also this magnesium flash, you know. You get in these early photos with open mouth because they are surprised to see, poof, they have this magnesium. Okay. Then you will have the reverse situation, again, when you think of this kind of, the problem of the uncanny, this mixture of movement and depth and image and fixity. You have, with the creation of cinema, of course, the moving image. And this was, oops, where is it? Okay. No, I will speak, yeah, no, yeah, I'm right. I will speak a little bit later of cinema. Okay. You have the opposite, was a little bit the myth of Pygmalion. This idea that the sculptor fall in love with this statue, and Venus, who is a good goddess after all, pity him and give life to the statue. And this is an academic painting of Jean-Léon Gérôme representing the moment, let's see, with the statue turned alive. So here you have this moving image, I would say. It's an image to start with, but then suddenly life come in it, and it gets transformed, and you get this kind of uncanny division, you see, where the border between life and death, or if you want, between image and movement, become to be blurred. And in his fantastic book, David Friedberg, the book is called The Power of Images. It's a very, very interesting book. It's with a lot of examples around that. And he have also mentioned certain image in religious context this time, not in mythological context like you have here, in religious context where you have the same idea that due to the power of prayer, of ecstasy, if you want, the saint could suddenly animate a statue in front of him. And I have two examples of that, implying in each time Saint Bernard. On the left, the painting by Ribalta shows that, of course, he was in front of a crucifix, in stone or in plaster or whatever. And then suddenly, because he's so involved in his prayer, suddenly Christ detached himself and just hug him like this. If it happens to me, I would have run away. But anyway, apparently for Saint Bernard, this was great. The other image is a little bit more weird, I must say. It is that the same guy, now in front of the Madonna statue, and she liked him, I guess. She gave him some of her milk. What you see, it's a kind of stream of milk from her breast to his mouth. you have the mouth slightly open. Yeah, we think he's in prayer, but no, he was thirsty, I guess. Anyway, these are very weird type of this is the stuff I like, of course. You could feel it. And anyway, okay, these two painters are not too famous. Well, they are in Del Prado, in the Museo del Prado in Madrid. So, okay, they are Spanish painters. And okay, so you have sometime in this religious context also this idea of statue that suddenly turn alive, like the automat, in a way. So suddenly they transform themselves in living creature. And as I was saying, let's say the sector for our modern era where the image will move is, of course, cinema. And here I have a very blurred image because I should have a little film instead of one of the early film of the Frères Lumière that was shown here in the museum some time ago. What it shows, it's only the big train coming in the station and then people getting out, and that's it. It's very short film, but it's the very beginning of the cinema. And what was so striking there, it is that instead of contrary to the photography, now you have an image with movement, and then an image that brings some feeling of life. In both cases, if you have photo, let's say, that fix the movement, or here, cinema who animate what is fixed, if you want, you have always the same problem of the border between image and movement, between life and death, between soul and body, if you want, are always a little bit blurred. And this is precisely where you begin to have this uncanny feeling. And I would say it's always linked to a certain denial of death also. So if statue can animate themselves, if image can turn in movement, it's as if death is not completely definite, and we could maybe have an hesitation on the real point where the two things are well distinguished between life and death. The fact is, and I show you the picture of Freud here because it's him who have insisted on that. The fact is that there is one aspect of our mental life, let's say, where we don't believe in our own death. And this is the unconscious. For the unconscious, death doesn't exist. Your death doesn't exist. Well, you will say, oh, I dreamed last time that I was dead. Yeah, you dreamed that you were dead, but you were listening what people were telling you around. Poor guy, he was so nice. To whom goes the piano? You are there, you are in your tomb, you are dead, but you hear all of that. So meaning that, in fact, you are not dead. You have, for the unconscious, death doesn't exist. And I would say also even the principle of contradiction doesn't exist either. That means you could have, like this, somebody in a tomb and also listening and participating even to the conversation if you want. You bunch of bastards, you're thinking about, anyway. He could suddenly wake up. In the dream, all this is possible, in the world of the dream. And Freud have insisted on that, and he says even he linked some phenomenon of heroism, for instance, in war, due to this kind of difficulty to believe in his own death that we have. We are very aware of the death of others, but of our own death, it's impossible to represent it itself. And even at the level of the unconscious, for instance, you could say, oh, yeah, but sometimes we lose conscience. But it seems that these experiences don't leave traces in the unconscious. So for the unconscious, you don't die. You are immortal. And this is a kind of denial of death, of course, which is very, very strange, but very localized, if you want, and it's probably the source of all these hesitation that I was mentioning before. The only thing that we are more conscious of course, is the death of others, and because we see them and we mourn them and things, and so we have a lot of usage to deal with that, but to represent yourself, to yourself, your own death, this is kind of impossible. See what it will be after, how it will react, how it will be. there is any beyond death and all this. This we cannot represent it in any rational way, I would say. And that means also that the feeling of your finitude, of your mortality, is something you have to be conscious. It's never in the unconscious level, but if you think of that, if you say, okay, I'm not eternal, for the unconscious, you could say, I know that I'm not eternal, nevertheless, I don't believe it. And I believe that I'm immortal. This is the unconscious way to put it. But when you are conscious, of course, you know that it will end, it will not be endless. And then you have, say, like Zizek says, unconsciously, we all believe we are immortal. There is no death anxiety in our unconscious, which is why the very phenomenon of consciousness is grounded in our awareness of our mortality. That means that this awareness of mortality is like the degree 0 of consciousness. In any part of our conscious life, we always have this as a kind of background that one day we will die. This brings me to the subject of symmetry. Okay. Painters were interested in this subject. I will give you a few examples, and especially in the work of Emily Carr. Symmetry deals, of course, with the death of the others. And because there's so many usage linked to that, funerary usage, I think in a way we have themed the anxiety that this should provoke. So every culture has funerary usage like this to deal with this mortality. And here you have two pictures done by Edwin Holgate. One is in the museum here, the one on the right, that represent tombs in an Indian village on the Skeena River. The Skeena River is the north of British Columbia. It's in the mainland. It's a huge river going quite deep inside. And you see the mountain behind, the Rockies and all that. And these people have the usage to not really to bury their death underground. It's easy to understand why, because before the introduction of metal tools, it was difficult to dig in the ground, and especially in mountain where you have a lot of rocks. And so what they did, they put their death under a canoe or in a box, or even in these little constructions that you see here, and that was so striking for Holgate to make two paintings about them. And so they are like little houses, if you want, in which there is a kind of box in which the bones of the deceased will be, but it's not really underground. It's like flat on the ground, and then the people can visit them and go to one houses to the other. Holgate did also a more familiar type of image for us, the Christian type of cemetery, one of his most lyrical painting of the end of his life in 1949, when he moved since a few years already there in the Laurentides, and he lived in the north of Montreal there, and he made this kind of very touching type of scene with a church in the background and the tomb in front with more or less abandoned, or quite old, and with a person gathering flowers for one of her deceased. So this interest that you have in cemetery with a painter like Holgate, you have it also a lot with Emily Carr. She have been fascinated by that. You have, for instance, she even visited a place where she finds structure quite similar to the one I just showed you in Holgate painting. Street of grave houses. What you see there is not houses inhabited by people. They are tombs, in fact. And she made one big, let's say, watercolor like the one on the left, and then she made few of them representing individually these little houses in which the dead are hidden, if you want. And in the lecture she gave in front of Vancouver audience at the time, it's called her lecture on the totems, because she spoke of the art of the, she mentioned this thing here. She says, the dead are buried in the ground, and perfect miniature little houses are built over them, having chimneys, windows, door, etc. Within, you will see all the treasures of the dead: clothes, sewing machine, children's toy, woman hairs, warrior weapons, dishes, boots, hats, and if possible, a photo of the deceased. Though this only in the case of young person, the whole ones do not like portrait of themselves. The cemetery is divided into little streets. The little houses of the dead are gaily painted, not too alike in color and design. They have also little garden around them. So she was very interested in that, and its structure quite similar to the one that Holgate have seen. This was done in Hazeltown. Hazeltown is also on the Skeena, but much deeper inside of the country, and in which you have, Hazeltown was a mine town, if you want. So there were people, white people there exploiting the mines, and so that's why also it was relatively easy of access for a painter like Emily Carr could go to visit that. Yeah. Before that time, what is this? Oh, okay. Then this and this. Before that time, she has seen also usage much more peculiar that was not in her tradition. You see, if you think of Occidental tradition about funerary way, okay, to put the body not in the ground but on the ground, it's not so striking and so different. And also to have a little construction above it, it's like a little bit our monuments. But in certain area, the bones, or let's say the corpse, were put in the trees, like you see here in kind of boxes attached to the trees, as if not only they are not on the ground, but they are in the air. And I was surprised to see in a marvelous author of the 17th century, it's called Thomas Brown. I don't know if you ever read his stuff, but he says that the only example known of this usage in the antiquity, it was by the Scythian. The Scythian are the utmost barbaric people that you could imagine in antiquity. They always speak of them like the barbaroi. You know, barbaroi in Greek means the one who doesn't know how to speak. Barbaroi, like if he was just making blah, blah, blah. And so the Scythian were particularly, they were people living really in the margin of the Roman Empire, for instance, near, I would say, the actual Russia in this region. And he says, the Scythian who swore by wind and sword, that is, by life and death, were so far from burning their bodies that they declined all interment and made their graves in the air. That's exactly, and I guess that as much as Thomas Brown was surprised by that, I would imagine also that Emily Carr was also dealing now with a usage that was very different to what she was used to. Another variation of that interested her also, it is the so-called mortuary pole. What they did, they took a tree trunk and treated almost as a totem, but on the top of it, there's a box there where the deceased is. And in this case, we know that these two posts, if you want, have been devoted to the wife of a chief, Chief Skidgate, and she have painted in 1912 the one who is on the left on the photo. You see that in 1884, of course, there was two of them. When she visited there, the one had disappeared already, but she could make the one on the left. If you, of course, the image is reverse-like, but if you compare, you will see the two protruding things that correspond to probably les nageoires, the fins, yeah, the fins of big fish or something. And then on the top, this figure, but behind the plaque, if you want, that you see there, you have a coffin there. So it's a kind of variation of this idea of putting people in the air. Of course, there was also a lot of these native people who were converted to Christianism, and they had, well, what I would say regular type of cemetery that America could visit easily. Like this one was near Vancouver. It's in North Vancouver Mission. And there was buried also the children of her friend, Sophie. She speaks always of her, an Indian woman that visited her and befriended her. And they went together to see this cemetery. You have another example of the same subject like I presented you last time. Before a trip to Paris, and then on her way back, she redo sometimes the same painting twice with using old watercolor that she did before. And on the one on the left, when it was presented for the first time, she titled that, and she changed the title after, I think, with good reason. She called it The Battered Guardian of the Graves. The battered meaning that as if, well, he lost a wing, and he lost also one of the ear tuft, you see, above his head. And as if he was protecting the graves, but now losing more or less this ability because he's half of a bird. He's not like it was. And it's a thunderbird, of course, that normally should be very forceful and all that, but there he seems to be demolished. I thought first, when I saw the watercolor alone, I thought first, well, this must be one of the let's say, people of Campbell River, the native really did that, because which Christian will put a thunderbird at the beginning of their cemetery, at the entrance of their cemetery? But when she redo the painting, like you can see on the right, you see crosses on the right. You see little crosses appearing. So that's probably a Christian cemetery in which you have a mixture of both, of partly, let's say, some sculpture coming from these people, and also the usage of a Christian cemetery. The title was changed, The Lone Watcher, because in a way she was implying that this battered guardian of the grave was like losing its ground, losing the fight for its own culture, if you want. And The Lone Watcher was a better title. But when she presented in 1909, she had this kind of title that will accompany maybe the idea of the Indian as vanishing people. And the paradox it is that this monument, in fact, was not so old. It was done in 1902, and it's just 7 years after that it was destroyed like this. So it gave the impression that it had been there for years and years, but in fact it was not so old. And so the idea of a vanishing group of people is not, doesn't apply. Okay, so you see all this theme of cemetery, I think in a way when you think of the uncanniness of the situation of these, the proximity of death and all that, in a way it has been so much tamed by culture. The funerary usage that we have, if you are Jewish, if you are Christian, is so well defined that in a way we have ways to deal with the anxiety in that case. And the problem, when you want to go a little bit deeper toward uncanniness, I thought of using here one idea of Jacques Lacan, who is another psychoanalyst, let's say, after Freud and French psychoanalyst, who speak of, I would say now, not so much that the death of the others, but much closer to our own death. I'm not very funny this time. The subject is a bit serious. Anyway, Lacan speaks of a double death, the symbolic death and the real one. Okay, I will try to explain what it is. And in between, you have a stretch of time in which you are conscious, but you are already dead, symbolically, let's say, and then finally you are dead for real. And the example he gives, the first example he gives, he thinks of Oedipus, but not Oedipus that you see here as in the painting of Ingres, with challenging the Sphinx. the famous riddle, who is 4 legs in the morning, with 2 legs at noon, and 3 at night? And the answer, of course, is man, because you start with on 4, and you finish with a cane, like 3 legs, I guess. Well, and not this Oedipus, but the Oedipus after, I would say, what he did, what he is famous for, having killed his father and having married his mother. And even if he was not conscious of it when he did it, for the ancient, this is the ultimate crime. So why Lacan called this, when he realized that, what he called is a symbolic death, it is because the order of symbols is the order of culture. And in every culture, you have belief and you have behavior that are acceptable, and there are others that are not acceptable. If you want, the symbolic world or the cultural world will define what is the law, what is what is forbidden by the law, and where you should not go further than that. And in a way, Oedipus did. Oedipus did marry his mother and kill his father, and because of that, he was beyond the law, if you want. He did something that put him out of his symbolic world. And what he lived after that, you have it in the famous play of Sophocles, which is called Oedipus at Colonna, in which he's an old man, and he as you know, he pierced his eyes, he became blind by himself. He blinded himself because he could not see anymore, say, the real world, if you want. He created this night around him, and he became a kind of bitter old man, not having any meaning in his life anymore. It's as if you are beyond the law. You cannot be anymore protected by this culture of yours. You have did so much, and you went so far in the human experience that you become even inhuman. You become like a monster. So this is what Oedipus at Colonna is about. And he goes like this, and suddenly you have, at the end of the play, you have people who approach him and want him to be part of their city and all that, as if now we want to transform you in a symbol yourself. You will be part of our city and all that. And he says, he have in the Sophocles drama, he says at that time, he says, it's the moment when I'm nothing, when I'm really like reduced to death, in fact, to death, that you begin to come to me and to treat me as a human being, as if the experience of Oedipus at that time was kind of complete reduction, let's say, of his subject, of what he is, to avoid. He's nothing. He's beyond what he could be in the symbolical order in which he was. And now, okay, the only thing that could happen, it is that some people will try to reintegrate him, let's see, in their culture or in their symbolic world. To illustrate that, with a different example, of which I have no picture, but I will read you a text. There is, you may have read this story of Edgar Allan Poe about Valdemar. This is really uncanny. What it is an hypnotist that succeeded to obtain from a dying man the idea that, let me hypnotize you, and I may prolongate your life, and maybe you will go through the experience of death, and you will become alive again. And Valdemar was a man, according to Poe, of course, living alone, having nothing, no relative, nothing. Said, okay, why not? Let's try. And so the hypnotist came, and he began to make his pass, and Valdemar started to sleep. And he stayed like this for 7 months. Okay. Then what I'm reading now, it's what happened after 7 months. Okay. Mr. Valdemar, so the hypnotist asked him, can you explain to us what are your feelings and wishes now? So you have to imagine the guy is like, he's symbolically dead for sure, but maybe we don't know. He says, he made him like this by hypnotism, and so there was an instant return of the hectic circles on his cheeks. The tongue quivered, or rather rolled violently in the mouth, although the jaws and lips remained rigid as before. And at length, the same hideous voice, which I have already heard, broke forth. For God's sake, quick, quick, put me to sleep, or quick, waken me, quick. I say to you that I am dead. This is a thing that nobody can say, normally, except in this story. I was thoroughly unnerved, says the hypnotist, and for an instant remained undecided what to do. At first, I made an endeavor to recompose the patient, but failing in this through total abeyance of the will, I retraced my step and as earnestly struggled to awaken him. Okay, he decided to make a pass and he will get awake. In this attempt, I soon saw that I should be successful, or at least I soon fancied that my success will be complete. And I'm sure that all in the room were prepared to see the patient awaken. For what really occurred, however, it is quite impossible that any human being could have been prepared. As I rapidly made the mesmeric passes, he called it mesmerism at the time, but it's what we call hypnotism today. It's because one of the great hypnotists of the time was called Mesmer. And I think it was a Swiss man. And I made ejaculation of dead, dead, absolutely bursting from the tongue and not from the lips and of the sufferer. His whole frame at once, within the space of a single minute or less, shrunk, crumbled, absolutely rotted away beneath my hands. Upon the bed, before the whole company, there lay a nearly liquid mass of loathsome and detestable putrescence. Yeah, okay. So why Lacan quote this story? Of course, because it's a good example of these two deaths. You have the symbolic death when you could say, Valdemar accepts that he will die, and says to hypnotist, okay, make your little experience, maybe it will be interesting, we'll see, and all that. And then you have the real death, 7 months after, which is horrible, of course, because as if he was maintained like this in state of putrefaction, and then suddenly the whole thing revealed itself. The problem to understand always in all these examples, it is that there is a kind of beyond of the idealization that the symbolic world can still maintain. If you go beyond that, you are in a region like this man who is under hypnotism. He's conscious, apparently, since he can say, I'm dead. I tell you that I'm dead. He has some consciousness, but on the other hand, there's nothing in this consciousness that could be described like something close to what we know. And then I thought, I says, okay, if there is some people who are interested by this kind of in-between symbolic death and real death, it is that the Indian people that Emily Carr visited, and that will be expressed at first in these masks of ancestors, people who are dead already, but are represented by masks like these two examples that I give you, habitually with kind of a weird color, who doesn't correspond to the real life color, and also with gesture who are difficult to understand, like the one with open mouth like this. Is he speaking? Is he, what exactly is doing in this? Here in this case, if you think of it, real death is before the symbolic death. These ancestors have died, and then they live as ghosts. They live as spirit. So as if their symbolical life is not over. And indeed, this is a kind of profound idea, because the ancestors are responsible of the creation of the culture. They are the first one who have created the tradition in which we live today. And so they are more or less still alive in the symbolic world, up to the end, let's see, of our own culture. When our culture will disappear, these Indians could say, well, then also our ghosts will disappear. But you understand that here you have a reverse situation, a little bit like in Hamlet. In Hamlet, the dead father comes to Hamlet and says, okay, you have to revenge me, you have to kill Claudius, who have married my wife and killed me and all that. He is dead, but he appears as a ghost because the symbolic aim of his life have not been achieved. And he asks, of course, Hamlet to do it for him. You understand that even after death, then, okay, maybe you don't believe in ghosts and all that is not important, but that even in the imagination of Hamlet himself, he could say, well, my father now ordered me to kill this usurpateur, this man who took the throne and the wife of my father and all that, and I have now this obligation. But then in this case, the real death, la mort réelle, if you want, the real death, precedes the symbolic death. Like in most of this image, of course, of the Indian also. And I'm tempted, since you are so patient with me with this subject, I'm tempted to go a little bit further and to evoke one of the great theme of young Hegel philosophy, where he tried to see, he described an experience that is almost like madness in a way. He called it the night of the world. It is this experience in which the ego, let's say, will contract on himself so much that all the images, all the representation we have of the external world will more or less vanish and disappear. And he said, when you touch this level of void, if you want, in which you could speak really of the night of the world is completely obscure, then you feel the necessity of symbol and of culture. Because when you don't have this, you have nothing to mediate between you and the world outside. The culture is there to tell you how to look at things, how to see them, and it makes a kind of intermediary. They protect you also for things you are not supposed to see, like this kind of putrescent Valdemar. This is the thing that a culture can avoid you to be confronted to. And so this experience of the night of the world is as if the subject, let's say, or the philosopher or whatever, somebody who thinks, is reduced to nothing, in a way, to avoid, and then feel the necessity to reconstruct the world. He says, toward the end, the only thing you see, it's a bloody head. It's a kind of vanishing, ghastly type of apparitions. It's really like madness, in a way. And a philosopher that maybe is more familiar to, at least to French-speaking people, that could, in fact, describe an experience of the same kind as Descartes. You remember in Descartes, he starts saying, you have to doubt of everything, you have to put in doubt everything that was told to you. It's not sure that there's an external world. It's not sure that you are even yourself, a body and everything, and goes on and on like this. And then suddenly you feel, well, you have nothing he create really a kind of void. And this experience that Descartes did, in his book, he says, j'étais dans mon poêle. He was not in his stove, but he was in a room where there was a stove, okay, dans le poêle. And he says, I was thinking of that, how to doubt of everything and go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then suddenly you really, he thought that he will find like this, the absolutely certain ground in which something that you cannot really doubt, the cogito, I'm thinking, therefore I am, and if I am, I'm a substance, and to go on like this. But in fact, before that, before the cogito, you could say, when he doubt of everything, he's like in the night of the world of Hegel. So you have reduced it to everything, and then the big need of to reconstruct it. Alors, that's what happened after. I think, so therefore I am. What I am a substance that think. Am I perfect? No, I'm imperfect since I doubt before. If I have the idea of perfection, that probably there's something which is perfect, that must be God, and God guarantee now the existence of the world, that poof, slowly you reconstruct the whole surrounding that you were putting in doubt before. So these two movements, I would say, are really crucial to understand this kind of double depth, if you want, but also what it strikes so much, it is the importance of the need of culture, if you want. The culture becomes necessary to be able to deal with this type of situation of total void. And the ancestors that we were showing before are the people who have, in fact, lived the two things. They were dead, and then they were responsible of the creation of the culture also. So they have lived these two things, these two extremes. And you could say that the imagination that is behind, let's say, an entreprise like Descartes or like Hegel describing that, it's one of the aspects of imagination is negative. We always think of imagination as adding things, but it can also function by subtracting things, by removing things. And in the heart of the people that interested so much Émile Carr, you see that very often. You have first a dismemberment, I would say, a dismemberment of the animals that they want to show. Like here, you have two animals. You have an eagle. I don't know if I can, oops. Oh, no, I should not touch that because you have an eagle at the center, and you see his claws on each side like hands a little bit. So as if the first thing you do with an image, you divide it in pieces like this, and then you recompose it in a very symmetrical way. Habitually, the animal is split in half and fold over like this. So it seems to have doubled and all that, but in fact, it's the same animal presented twice like this, folded. And there is also a huge whale, also is represented with her hen tail on the top there. And so you have this division of things and then a recombination of them. And this art, of course, is a good example of this kind of work of the imagination being also negative and also positive. Dismembering, but also reconstructing. And this type of work was difficult to understand to Émile Carr because these are Haida people, and they have very, very elaborated, let's say, their way of depicting the world. And that shows again that when after this experience of the night of the world, if you reconstruct culture, you don't just go back to nature as you saw it before. You reconstruct it differently. The world of symbol is not an imitation, a pure imitation of the world as it is. It's a world in which you have chosen some aspect and you have refused them and you have recomposed them. I would say it goes with humanity. We need to have this, to have a symbolic world who is not just a pure imitation of the world as it is. And of course, their art is an excellent example of that. One of their, let's say, more typical type of work was also the famous totem poles. And here I want to read you what Marius Barbeau said about them, about these artwork, because you will see it's related also to death. He says, the totem poles and grave houses are memorial of their dead, and they will find it unworthy to sell them to strangers. A totem pole beside is still to them a symbol of their right to the ancestor hunting ground. This means the totem pole also marked the territory that belongs to you, and that's why to remove them from them was criminal in a way, because then you lose the property of your own land. And the hunting ground is still a vital issue, says Barbeau, with almost all of the Gits can. Conserving the totem pole to a certain extent means safeguarding one's right to the hunting ground. The figures carved on the poles are also a public testimonial of what is still remembered at large as the history of the past. Then that will bring me to one specific painting of Émile Carr that was very intriguing to me, and I wanted to know a little bit more about it. So so it's called the Crying Totem. And as you see, it represents a kind of old man on the top with two streams of tears. I think it's a possible interpretation of these two lines there. And he seems to hold something, maybe an animal, that you see his two hands like this. At the end of the tears, you have little faces that appear, like maybe children, or I don't know what. And he's standing above another representation, which is probably a frog. What we know about their type of iconography, it can be a representation of a frog. This painting was based on, like often, a watercolor that Émile Carr did before in 1912. The painting is a little bit after, in 1928. And so she used this watercolor to make her final painting, as you can see. And this was done in Tanu. Tanu is in the Queen Charlotte Islands in the north. These big islands were offshore of British Columbia, where the Haida people were living. And at the time when she did that, she visited this place, it was abandoned completely at the time when she visited it. And here you see a picture, a photo that was taken by Monsieur Rossler, and in which Émile Carr is painting. I don't know if you see a standing woman in front of a white square or a white rectangle. And this is her paper put there vertically, and she's copying one of those totems. It's not the crying totem that I showed you before, but it is in the same vicinity. It's in Tanu, where you had this abandoned house with the totem in front of them. And she was, of course, very thrilled by that. That's exactly what she wanted to do, to take notes of all the totems that are possible and to see them one after the other. And the two people in front of her are friends that are watching her drawing in front of the things. The idea was to, say, for instance, with these drawings done on the spot, to be able to make a definitive painting in studio in Vancouver when she come back. Here you can see one of these drawings that she did in front of the motif on the left, and then the finished painting that she did when she came back in Vancouver, and was exhibited, by the way, in 1927 in Ottawa. And the model, let's see, on the left, it corresponds to one of the totem pole, I think the first one on the left also, in the finished picture. To go back to the crying totem, it has been saved partly, let's say, and almost reconstructed also in the BC Museum in Victoria, which is an extraordinary museum. If you go to Victoria, you have to see their Museum of Anthropology. And what you see on the right, it is a photo of the same totem when it was in situ, when it was really at place in Tanu. It's the one on the left also. Maybe it's difficult to see, but you will see the crying chief is there also. But here you see much better on the left exactly what she had in front of her. And indeed, at the end of the long stream of tears, you see little personage, and not only a head, but a little child in a way. And maybe we could interpret also the animal that he holds, not like in Émile Carr, who looks a little bit like a bear or something, but rather like a frog again. And I mention that because you will see there is a legend about this weeping totem of Tanu that try to explain all the details, let's say, of the representation. I have three different myths. I will not read all the detail of this, but I will tell you en gros what it is. Myth, of course, you are in front of a depiction like this of a crying chief and all that, and you try to invent a story that will explain what happened. The story goes like this. It is, this chief was called Always Laugh. It's a wonderful, wonderful name, Always Laugh. And like Clewick was the one who smiled and all this. So this chief was called like this, and he decided to go with a big party of people to the island of Tanu to be able to hunt deer. And he says people like deer meat. We will go to kill the deers and we'll come back with this. And he goes with children also, and he says to the kids, okay, during the time we will hunt, you will keep the fire alive, saying that it's easier to keep a fire alive than to redo one anew. Okay, so the kid says, yes, grandfather, we'll do it, there's no problem. And when the hunting party come back in the camp later, the fire is extinguished. So the grandfather asks the kids, what did you do? He says, it's not because of us, it's because of the toads. He says, what? He says, yes, we find a big toad and we throw it in the fire and he burst. And bursting, he extinguished the fire. So then the whole chief says, oh, this is not good. You are not supposed to do that because then you kill without reason. To kill deer to feed our people, this is okay, but just to kill animals like this without any reason, this is not good. We should run away from here. And indeed, right away, they become to hear a kind of earthquake starting and then lava and all this, and they get all killed except the old chief. And so when he come back, he was known as the one who cries his children all the time. And so that explained the crying, it explained the toads, it explained the frogs, and the two kids, of course, at the end of his tears and all that. It seems a perfectly logical explanation, a little bit too much maybe. And also, what I'm not sure at all, it is this nice ecolo morality that you have there, that the Indians, what did I do? Here you have to be very still. It's not my main quality. Anyway, so they have this kind of quite rational type of explanation. In fact, we know before some reaction of people, say of at white that was, how do you call it, taking hot pots at animals when you shoot just for the fun of it. And one, okay. In the early time, let's say there was one guy that was killing raven, for instance, just for fun, and also seals. And he was reprimanded by the chief, don't do that. For good reason. The raven is a sacred bird, so you should not kill it just for. And seal, we eat them. So if you kill them at random like this, it's no good. So you could have maybe a basis like that, but let's say the theme of the frog also is associated very often to the volcanism like this. And it's always as if the mother of the frog punish the children by the same thing that he did to her child. And since they burn the frog, they will be burned by a volcano. This is the logic, of course, of this type of representation. But there is another explanation of the old man that you see on the picture of Emily Carr, that in fact it's probably closer to the truth, but it's very strange, very bizarre. So I read you another myth about it. Who doesn't give a damn of the crying, doesn't interpret what you see there as crying. He says, close to the island called Bonilla on the chart and Cal by the Haida, lying close to the north end of the Banks Island and not far from the Tsimshian towns of Kitkaltla, there live a saltwater chief or sea chief whose eyes drop out of their sockets at night and hang down his middle. At meal times, his friend return his eyes to their place and hold them there so that he can see what he eats. They also support his eyelids. This chief, not having any teeth, you see here, he's like this, not having any teeth, swallowed his food whole, and this consisted principally of harp seal. So he swallowed harp seal like this without chewing them. After holding his food for a few hours, he blows out the undigested bones and other parts with great force. Wow, this is a very different explanation. And maybe closer to the fantastic imagination of these people. And also suddenly I said, my God, this is close to the text that I was quoting you at the very beginning of this lecture of Freud, the Unheimlichkeit, the Uncanny, if you want, in which he analyzed a story by Hoffman, who's called The Sandman. What is The Sandman? It is the things that, a little bit like the Tsonokwa that I was speaking last time. It's to scare little children, to make them go to sleep. There was this evil man coming around 7:30, 8 o'clock. In my days, now it's 10, 11, anyway. But, and threaten the kids to throw sands in their eyes if they don't go to sleep. And if they don't, he do that, then remove their eyes and bring them to eat to his own children who have beaks and things like that. Well, kind of horrible story that only a German nanny could invent, you know, to put their kids to sleep. And the story that Hoffman tell after that, it says, okay, the Sandman, he says, I have a story about, story very similar to it. It is a young student, was called Nathaniel, and Nathaniel received from a lens crafter a little binocular, you see, to look at beautiful girls that he used to see at the house of an engineer, let's say, who is called Spallanzani. And this beautiful girl seems a little bit static, but she was extraordinary. And he heard them from time to time, she was saying always the same phrase, "Good night, my dear, good night, my dear," repeating like this. And suddenly he cannot anymore. He breaks with his girlfriend, Clara, and goes to Spallanzani. And when he entered there, Coppola, the optician that sold him the binocular, and Spallanzani are fighting with this statue, in fact, because what he was seeing through the window was not a real woman. It was a kind of automat, if you want. And by fighting, suddenly her eyes fall on the ground. And then, of course, Nathaniel, somber in craziness. It was such a shock, you know, to discover that this person that he thought was alive, that was beautiful and all that, was not only dead, but was also with her eyes out of her socket, a little bit like my old chief here. So I said, oh, this is a very uncanny type of connection. And of course, you know the explanation that Freud gave of this. He says, we know from psychoanalytic experience, however, that the fear of damaging or losing one's eye is a terrible one in children. A study of dreams, fantasies, and myth has taught us that anxiety about one's eyes, the fear of going blind, is often enough a substitute for the dread of being castrated. The self-blinding of the mythical criminal Oedipus was simply a mitigated form of the punishment of castration, the only punishment that was adequate to him according to the lex talionis, the Talion law. The real punishment of Oedipus should have been castration. Of course, this is the idea of Freud about the complex of castration, as if it's so evident in this case that the eyes are killed or removed from the head that it's a perfect image of it. And so then you see, again, we are dealing with what I was suggesting at the beginning. The uncanny always cover this type of difficult frontier or difficult border between death and life. And it's as you can understand now, that have nothing to do with the sublime. Yeah. It creates anxiety. It creates fear, to believe in ghosts and things like that, spirits and things. And but it's not the same fear that you have in front of a beautiful spectacle like the sublime. So really, I think Freud was right. There is a kind of region in which we have an aesthetic reaction, not of joy, not of pleasure, but who is similar to the one we have in the sublime, with a little bit of fear, but in a very specific region, let's say, of anxiety. So I don't know if I succeeded to convince you of this region. Next time, I will go even further in that direction, so be ready. I will speak of the surrealist idea of a convulsive beauty. And you will see it's quite close to this uncanniness also. Okay, thank you.